So do you have a smartphone in your pocket? Have you ever read the fine print from your carrier? Did you know that it states you shouldn't keep your phone within a few millimeters of your person? In the last decade, we've had an explosion of technology, smartphones, tablets, wearable technology, and even smart meters in homes. The state of California recently issued an advisory on cell phones stating there are possible health effects from cell phone electromagnetic fields, or EMFs. Recent studies suggest that long-term cell phone use may increase the risk of brain cancer and other health problems. Are cell phones safe? As a physician, as a father, I'm concerned about the perils of technology. Everywhere you look, you see cell towers, right? In fact, I saw one recently on top of a water tower. The truth is we have no idea about all the signals bombarding our environment. How is it affecting us? On today's show, we'll talk to some experts as well as learn more about how we can be proactive to keep ourselves and our families safe. That's coming up on the Dr. Nandi Show. As a practicing physician, I wanted to create a place that folks could go to that not only delivers great health information in a way that's understandable and useful, but also share inspirational stories to help us all grow. People think that once you're adults, you're done learning. You're not. In order to be successful, you have to have an open mind to learn. Real problems discussed in depth with real solutions. This is the Dr. Nandi Show. You're watching the Dr. Nandi Show. The headaches, nausea, insomnia, disorientation, and digestive difficulties are just some of the symptoms people have been suffering when near electronic devices. This electromagnetic hypersensitivity, or EHS, can be devastating. My first guest is Karen McClellan, who's been suffering from bad headaches. Welcome to the show, Mary. Thank you for being here. And you may notice she's hardwired. You're very sensitive to some of these EMFs, aren't you?
Right, and by choice I asked them today if I could use a hardwired, and they were very, very accommodating.
And here's the thing, and so we don't think about it, and when I asked her before the show, she said, listen, there's so much I cannot control about what I'm being exposed to. When I can control something, I ask for it. That's an important message, so do what you can in your life, exactly like she's doing, to control the amount of EMFs that you're getting. Tell us about what happened to you. You know, you have an amazing story. Tell us about it.
Well, in 2000, I received my first cell phone like everybody.
Yes.
And using it was a joy and freedom, but I noticed I kept getting headaches when I would use it, especially for prolonged periods. So I started using an earpiece, and I tossed my phone to the passenger side of the car, and I was fine. Headaches went away. Later on, my husband put a Wi-Fi router in the house, and every time I would open up my laptop, start using the Wi-Fi, the exact same headache would come back. Starting in the back, I was never prone to headaches, so this is really significant. Start in the back, and it would turn into a dizziness, a fogginess. I would be in a conversation like this and sort of forget where I was going, forget your name. It was terrible. So I knew that I had to keep Wi-Fi away from me as best possible. I got a great job, got a beautiful little BlackBerry, and that BlackBerry gave me blistering headaches.
Wow.
So I thought to myself, well, this is technology, you're gonna have to get used to it. I forced myself to use it for about a week. All I did was get sicker and more sick, and the headaches got more intense.
You probably couldn't even work, could you?
You know, I could barely conversations. I was always stumbling over everything. I realized this is ridiculous. So at that point, my husband and I decided to get rid of all the cordless devices in the house. Everything in our house, our desktop, even our keyboard and our mouse, corded. I was just going to eliminate every possibility. My headaches went away. I was doing fine. And then in 2012, a DT came to my door, told me they were going to put a smart meter on my house.
Wow.
And I asked the man, I said, listen, let me tell you, I'm not like everybody else here. I'm very sensitive to these things. And he was like, don't worry, it'll be fine. I'm in my kitchen, I'm home all day. Within a couple hours, I've got that headache, not
Back
just
again.
any headache. The same Wi-Fi, the same cell phone headache, BlackBerry headache, this is the same headache. And it progresses into the confusion, the dizziness, all of this.
It just changes your entire mind, doesn't it?
It does, and when you suffer like that, it's very hard to it's very difficult to fight for yourself. So I called DT right away. The next day, they came out and changed the meter. I got back my analog meter. I get this reprieve, and my health comes back, right away. And then on television, segment after segment on the local news, I see everybody. These people have my symptoms right in a row: the headache, the confusion, the lightheadedness, the dizziness, morphing into insomnia, the digestive problems. And it's a pattern. It's, you know, one of the arguments about this illness is that they can't distinguish exact symptoms.
Right.
But I saw these people for years.
The same thing.
Everybody kept saying to me, how did you get your analog meter back? I don't know. But for 4 years, I had a reprieve. And then one day I came home, my husband greeted me at the door with that look like someone had died and said, I'm so sorry. They came while we were gone, put in your second smart meter on. I had guests coming over, a big dinner that night. By the time I got the meal cooked and sat down, I had the headache, I had the lightheadedness, I felt like I had the flu, I crawled into bed. So the next morning, we actually left the house at night. The next morning I talked to DT, I begged them, please take this meter off my house, and they refused to. My symptoms got worse. The pain in my body was terrible. I went to my doctor, I said, listen, you know, I gotta make sure, I think it's a smart meter. I've never had these kind of headaches before except for these wireless situations. And the doctor did an MRI on me, and she did a full
everything negative.
Everything came out negative. And she said, well, you really think it's a smart meter? And I said, yes. So this is a Tuesday. My doctor's a University of Michigan Family Service doctor. And on Thursday, she called me up and said, I did the research. This is not a diagnosed disease, but you have classic symptoms of everybody that has these smart meters. It's all over the internet. She said, here's a letter, take it to DTE, tell them to give you your analog meter back. And that's what it said.
And they did finally?
Completely ignored it.
Really?
I ended up selling my house in Ann Arbor.
Wow.
My home of 25 years because I couldn't get that meter off my house. I couldn't live. I was living with one circuit going to my kitchen refrigerator and one to my furnace. I couldn't live like that any longer. So I, by the grace of God, found a tiny little city. And in November, my husband and I moved to Chelsea, Michigan. They own their own utility company. And they said, we'd be glad to give you an analog meter.
Oh.
Before the ink was dry on that contract of buying that home, there was an analog meter on that house. And it's been 2 months, and my health is I'm doing so much better.
Oh, I'm so happy.
I'm so
Thank
lucky.
you for sharing the story. And here's why we wanted Mary to come on, is because of the fact is that, you know, we want to let you know that obviously you may not have the symptoms that she does, but her story tells you that there's something that's happening, right? So if you can, let's do something to prevent stories like hers from being replicated all over the world in the country. And if it's happening to her, in some low level, it's happening to your children. And that's what we want to talk about. So this is something that's real. Let's study it more. Let's figure out how people have to sell their house in order to be able to have headache-free and symptom-free lives. It's really important. We have to advocate for folks and understand that this is something that's real, and we have to do something about it now. So exactly what are EMFs and how can they be harming us? That's next on The Dr. Nandi Show.
I strongly believe that radiofrequency radiation is a human carcinogen. And once you've labeled something as a human carcinogen, you have to do all you can to reduce exposure to as low as reasonably achievable.
Welcome back. You're watching The Dr. Nandi Show, and we just heard from Mary Karen, who has had physical side effects from EMFs. Here to give us more insight is the amazing Dr. Anthony Miller. Now, Dr. Miller is a distinguished cancer researcher and advisor to the World Health Organization, and we're glad to have him. Dr. Miller, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure and honor. Now, for folks who've never heard of this, what is radio frequency electromagnetic radiation?
Radio frequency radiation is the sort of radiation used to power cell phones, to enable you to listen on the cell phones, to do your Wi-Fi on your computer, and is anticipated to be used for what is going to be called the Internet of Things, where we anticipate having cars that drive themselves, lorries that go along without having drivers there. And we're a little bit worried because as the amount of this radiation increases, the possibility of adverse health effects, and there are already major indications of adverse health effects increases. So we are trying to get across the message that we want to reduce, not increase, exposure to radiofrequency radiation. Well, there are two sorts of evidence we use when we assess whether or not an exposure, a chemical radiation causes cancer, and this is my particular field of expertise. One of them is what we call human epidemiology, studies done in mankind.
Correct.
And there have been a series of studies, starting in Sweden, one of the countries which started using cell phones the earliest, then going to a large study in France, and then an international study conducted through the International Agency for Research on Cancer. I was one of those who was on the scientific council of the agency when it was started. And all of them have shown a doubling, at least a doubling, of the risk of brain cancer. And some of them have shown increased risk of other cancers, cancers that affect the auditory nerve, the nerve where we hear. Now, of course, when most people use their cell phone, they hold it up to their head. And the part of the brain that has been most commonly affected by these brain cancers has been the part of the brain nearest where the cell phone was put. And of course, the auditory nerve, the nerve through which we hear, is also affected. So that's one class of evidence, and it's getting stronger. Indeed, we're now seeing increase in the incidence of brain cancer in young people, in children. Brain cancer is now the commonest cancer in children. We're seeing an increase in young adults in their teens, 20s, 30s. And when we see this sort of thing because of our previous experience with carcinogens introduced into the environment, tobacco, asbestos, we know it is only a matter of time before you see great increases in older people. Now, the second sort of evidence we use is evidence derived from special studies in animals. And only a week ago, the draft reports of a very major study conducted by the US National Toxicology Program in rats and mice have been released, which shows an increase, particularly in a cancer called schwannoma. Yes. Now, nobody has heard of that, but that happens to be the same type of cancer that causes the auditory nerve cancers. In the animals, it occurred in the heart because that's where most of the nerves were that were affected. But it also caused an increase in other cancers. So we now have two types of strong evidence. And then the other sort of evidence which is used is we're getting evidence of biological effects of these fields. We know that these fields can cause DNA changes. This was demonstrated in this National Toxicology Program. And in my view, having considered this very carefully over several years, reviewed all the evidence, I strongly believe that radiofrequency radiation is a human carcinogen. And once you've labeled something as a human carcinogen, you have to do all you can to reduce exposure to as low as reasonably achievable, which we did years ago for X-rays.
Right.
Ionides. Right.
And so it's a great advice, Dr. Miller. So to summarize what Dr. Miller says, he outlined three types of evidence: epidemiological studies, which he looked at populations where cancer risks are higher. He also stated that you looked at biological evidence, so we looked at animals that have increased tumors. And then we're talking about looking throughout in nations in which you can have increased risks of these types of carcinogens. And he said with this evidence that he is calling EMFs a carcinogen. So lots of you have been wondering, hey, you know what, is that cell phone or are these EMFs actually something that could be harmful? And we have one of the world's experts telling you unequivocally it can. I think it's time for us to act. As a parent, I know that this is going to compel me to do more, and I hope it compels you to do more as well. Dr. Miller, it's been very educational. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. Coming up next, a discussion on how EMFs can take an emotional toll on us. Coming right up.
There is studies that are linking higher use of social media to increases in depression. And we are seeing staggering increases, and specifically for teenagers with suicide as well.
Welcome back. You're watching the Dr. Nandi Show. I'd like to introduce Theodora Scarato. She's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, a scientific think tank focused on preventable health risks, a policy analyst, and she's also a clinical psychotherapist. Welcome her, please. Theodora, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. So, my pleasure. Tell me a little bit about, in your practice, what are you seeing with your clients as far as EMFs and electronics?
About 10 years ago, I started to notice clients coming in with issues which I had not seen before. So video game addiction, girls who are being bullied but yet unable to turn off the phones even though it was not safe and healthy for them. And my clients with ADHD unable to get off the computer. And what I have seen with the way we are using screens now, the overuse of screens, especially with children, is that it is exacerbating the mental health issues that have come in. So I became involved with Environmental Health Trust several years ago, and we are really looking at all the myriad of health issues related to our overuse of this technology.
And you talked about this. Our kids are glued to the screens, everywhere, right? Either they're watching television or they're looking at their smartphones or they're looking at their pads. And that's part of the reason why I did this. What is going on? And why is this almost an addictive type of behavior? Like you said, even people who are being bullied are not getting off their phones. What's going on?
Well, screens, interactive screens where you're getting the pings, the notifications, social media, it's not the same as TV. Right. And there's also, what we're seeing now is research showing a physiological addiction that comes out of every time you get a like, every time you hear back, or you're on these social media sites. It triggers a brain process which is very similar and in parallel to what we see with cocaine and sugar. So there is an increase in a neurotransmitter, dopamine, and you're actually getting little hits with all of this. So it is addictive, and there is research that is actually showing symptoms of addiction related to technology. And I tell you, I've seen a lot of things in my practice, but what I started to see several years ago, I found shocking, which is hard for me to say.
Yeah, it's amazing. I see people in my practice, in my patients, and they bring their children and they're constantly on. I do procedures, and the driver, I'm talking to the patient and the driver is looking at the phone. It's unbelievable. Now, we know about the positive stuff. Let's say you get a bunch of likes and people tell you good things. What about the negative feedback, and how is that affecting us? Somebody says that some disparaging, some horrible comment about you. How does that affect young children and their minds as well?
There is studies that are linking higher use of social media to increases in depression, and we are seeing staggering increases, and specifically for teenagers with suicide as well. I mean, one of the statistics that really shocked me, though it didn't shock me knowing what I know, is the increase in completed suicides for young girls, 10 to 14, 3 times the amount. And what I saw with clients was they wanted to be connected and thought this was helping them, but actually it's a platform where we haven't yet developed healthy boundaries and ways to set limits, and that's because it's addictive as well. And then on top of it, there are issues around the blue light, which affects our melatonin and our sleep, and that sleep is one of the most important things for our health that our body needs.
And I'll tell you, a lot of our parents, though, and I don't mean to put the blame on people, but our parents need to be a little bit less friendly to their kids. These kids, I see them using these phones as babysitters, using these phones just to, I don't want to deal with them. We have to take responsibility as parents and take some boundaries, give them boundaries of, this is the time I want you to be on your phone. And of course there's some positive things with them, but you cannot let your child be completely enveloped and completely encircled by this stuff. And many of my patients, the parents, don't even know what their kids are on. And forget about the blue light. They have no idea what their kids are doing. And it's a tragedy. If you heard what she said, that these young girls are completing suicides at a greater rate because of these devices. So we have to take some note. You have some brain imaging that you can illustrate some of these effects that you've been talking about.
Yeah, well, in addition to the psychosocial, there's
Yes.
also the issue of the radiation,
Yes.
which is Environmental Health Trust is spearheading, sharing information about that with our scientific advisors, who you have just interviewed, Dr. Anthony Miller. But what we have in this image is modeling done using MRIs and computer simulations of the penetration of cell phone radiation into the brain of an adult versus a child. So children are more vulnerable, and they actually are proportionately more exposed when compared to an adult. The lighter colors show higher intensity and penetration, and this is actually a slice of the brain. They model it in slices, and as you can see, and they're also showing the waveform. This is slowed down by several billion times, actually.
And so just so I can understand that people are watching, the yellow and all the other colors, explain to us. So the child is obviously in the right here, and the adult is the left. So tell me where it's penetrating more, maybe so I can understand it better.
The specific absorption rate, the intensity of the radio frequency goes deeper into the brain regions of a child when compared to an adult. So you see the lighter colors are
going all the way through.
Higher specific absorption rate is what it's called.
And so if you need more evidence, here's the thing, we're talking about it, we're talking about epidemiologic evidence, which means that looking at entire populations, we're talking about animal studies, now we're giving you brain images. I mean, you just have to wake up. And I'm not saying time to panic, call the cell phone companies and throw it and burn them all. It's not the message. It's that we need to be enlightened. We need to get more education. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so
I
much.
appreciate it. It's been very enlightening to have you and explain all the ramifications. And here's somebody who spent her entire life, talking about how the mind can be affected, and she's seen changes. And that's what compelled her to change her life and her career to help with this. So really appreciate your knowledge and expertise. On our show today, we've talked about the physical and mental effects of EMFs. Up next, how do technology companies and our government really fit into this picture? All this and more right after the break. Please stay with us.
In France and Israel, they've eliminated Wi-Fi in preschools. In Belgium, it's illegal to market cell phones to children under 7 years of age.
Really?
Yeah.
Welcome back. You're watching the Dr. Nandi Show. And I'm very excited to introduce our next guest, Mr. Frank Clegg. Now, Frank was the longtime president of Microsoft Canada. He was vice president at Microsoft for the central region of the United States, which included Michigan for several years as well. He is now the CEO of Canadians for Safe Technology, a not-for-profit coalition whose mission is to educate and inform about the dangers of technology and promote the use of safe technology. Frank, thanks for being our guest today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. And so total 180 degrees for you. You went from being, at the top of a technology company, so to speak, and now you're doing something very different. Tell us about that and how that happened and why that happened.
Well, Dr. Nandi, as you'd imagine, in my career, I've seen the tremendous benefits technology can provide.
Sure.
I've also seen, though, the harm that can happen if it's not implemented safely and properly. So I spent about a year going out and reviewing the science-based evidence, talking to experts from organizations such as Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and I came to the conclusion that our implementation of the way we use wireless technology really isn't safe, and we can do a lot better job.
And why did you, though? So you're CEO of Microsoft Canada. Why did you feel compelled to go to these institutions to find out if we're doing it right. Because, if you guys are watching at home, just like I'm saying, you're so busy doing your job. What compelled you to do that?
Well, what started was I was approached by 3 different families in our local community. They were having cell towers put in their neighbor. One was on a fire station right near a kid's playground. One was near a school, and the other one was near a smaller community. And I watched Health Canada come in to talk to our local city officials. And I just didn't like their message. Their message basically was, you have, if it has anything to do with health effects, it's out of your purview. You can't talk about it. Industry Canada came in and said, don't worry about it. We've got you protected. Well, if you do the research, the guidelines in North America have not changed in over 30 years.
Absolutely.
And so you start to do the homework and you start to talk to the experts. And I was retired at the time, and I said, you know what? This is not the right thing. It's not. I have grandchildren now. It's not good for my grandchildren. It's not good for my children. And so I really wanted. So I started Canadians for Safe Technology, co-founded it with a group of others. And really, as you said at the beginning of the show, it's really to educate people to say, we're not saying don't use the technology. What we're doing is saying use it safely. And people don't know that. People don't feel informed. They don't know you're not supposed to hold the phone to your head. And then also we're working with all levels of government to say, look, there's legislation you can pass. There's guidelines that are severely out of date. So let's give people the information they need, but let's also get government to update their guidelines.
What I love about Frank's story is this. When you see a problem, you can do one of 2 things, right? Say, it's not my problem. It's somebody else will fix it. The government will fix it. This organization will fix it. But what you did was very different. You said you were retired. He's done very well. Just hang out, right? Not my problem. Yeah. Instead, he said, I'm going to take an active role because I've got grandkids. And same with me. And we talked before. He said, I'm glad you're doing the show. And I said, I did it because why? Because I have kids.
Right.
And the kids need to be protected. So, what are we doing in North America compared to other countries? Are we doing as much? Are we doing more?
No, I'm sad to say we're not. North America is lagging. China, Russia, Italy, and Switzerland have guidelines 100 times safer than China. And Russia. And they understand this. They've been investigating this for decades. In France and Israel, they've eliminated Wi-Fi in preschools. In Belgium, it's illegal to market cell phones to children under 7 years of age.
Really?
Yeah. France has, in addition to the Wi-Fi work, they've also banned cell phones in middle and elementary schools. And in France, you cannot market cell phones to children under 14 years of age.
I love that.
Well, there are some bright spots in the U.S. California and Massachusetts have issued some guidelines to say, look, be aware. There's a safe way to use the technology, and there's an unsafe way to use it.
And here's the question: is that the science is not different in Europe, the science is not different in Asia. The science is still a science. And so, what is it about our wonderful capitalistic system that allows us not to have the same regulations? Because, when I talk to some others, they'll say, well, there's really no proof about this. Why is it that we don't accept the science and they do?
It's really difficult to answer that question. It's almost like I can talk to my work with Health Canada, but I would say that when I deal with the Health Canada individuals, it's like they're looking for any excuse not to investigate further, as opposed to the opportunity to say, look, science is a wonderful, wonderful discipline, and you always have a debate. And the great science talks about a very fulsome debate. And what we seem to be doing in North America is, instead of encouraging that debate, that exchange of idea, exploring the why better, what we're doing is saying, hey, here's 3 reasons why that experiment doesn't work. Let's ignore it. He's
saying something very, very important. I want you to make sure you understand it. There's 2 ways to take an argument, right? You can try to say, let's find any reason to doubt the evidence. Yes. And the other way is let's protect our kids and find, not to eliminate technology, but to use it safely. And so, you got about 30 seconds here, but what can we do as constituents to help our governments understand this? I have met with about 100 different elected politicians in Canada and the U.S. They will deal with something if they think their constituents are concerned. You need to tell them you're concerned. So go to Environmental Health Trust's website, go to c4c.org, go and satisfy yourself the science is there. I am 100% convinced it's there. And then reach out by an email or a phone call or a letter to your local, whether it's a state or your federal representative, and say, look, I'm concerned. The FCC guidelines
are 30 years out of date. They haven't changed in 30 years. I don't think you're protecting my family. I need you to step in and investigate this.
That's awesome. Frank, thank you so much.
Okay.
You have to hear his message. If you've got a child, if you've got a family member that you think is worth saving, talk to your officials that are elected, because you have the opportunity to make the change. And we've talked all about aspects of EMFs and cell phones. Coming up next, practical ideas we can each do to be safer. Coming right up.
If you have the device, your cell phone, right next to your ear, you have 100% of the effects. But these drop off by 80% less radiation if you're only at 1 foot.
Welcome back. You're watching the Dr. Nandi Show. We now have health journalist Nicholas Pineault, who published in 2017 the Non-Tinfoil Guide to EMFs. Great title. Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, your book is full of ways to really minimize the effects of EMFs. What are some of the best things we can do to minimize the effects?
Sure. Well, the number one thing I always say is that we should switch around the way we use technology. You see, most people are always on, sometimes off. So their cell phone is in the pocket, the cell phone is here, it's always open. Instead, reverse that. Always off, airplane mode, and sometimes on when you need it. The same thing can be said for your Wi-Fi router or other wireless technologies. That way, you minimize the risks that are associated with the technology.
It's such an interesting concept, because you're absolutely right. Everybody's like, well, I need to have it on most of the times. Maybe I can turn it off a little bit. You're like saying, turn it off as much as you can and minimize your exposure. What about our homes? We're completely seem to be wireless everywhere, and it seems like you're in the dark ages if you're not wireless, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. What can we do in our homes?
Well, make sure to not have wireless on unless you need it. So that's for starters. But especially at night, because this is when you get your most restorative sleep time if you don't have Wi-Fi on. So something I recommend in my book is simply having the Wi-Fi router plugged into a Christmas outlet timer. So that way you can set it up, and maybe 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. you don't have these signals, and your sleep will be much deeper, and also, well, your kids will be sleeping deeper.
This is huge. You hear what he said? He said, get your router hooked up to some kind of a timer, so between the time when you're sleeping, the thing is off. Huge. What else can we do?
Well, you got to create distance between your devices and you. You see, if you have the device, your cell phone, right next to your ear, you have 100% of the effects. But these drop off by 80% less radiation if you're only at 1 foot. So using earbuds or the speakerphone is way better. And when it comes to the laptop, for example, you see everyone is working right here on the lap.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we know that it's linked with brain cancer when it comes to use here. What is it linked with when you have the laptop right here on the lap? Well, it's sperm damage, reduced fertility, and you have exposure, laptop on the lap. You see, it's actually increasing exposure to your entire body and even your gut flora. So just to minimize the risk, just use it on a table instead of having it right here on your lap.
That's huge. I mean, just small things that you can do, simple changes that can affect your exposure. What about if you use it as an alarm? I think most of the planet now uses their phone as an alarm. What can you do?
Well, I use it as an alarm too. I only put it on airplane mode before I go to sleep. That's very important, because these signals, even if your phone is not actively pinging and doing anything, it's constantly emitting these EMFs. So it is preventing you from having your best sleep possible. So airplane mode, and you should be all set.
Yeah, so your alarm will still work if you're in an airplane mode. People forget about that. And what about, we've seen people that say that, my cell phone cuts out in elevators. So what's going on there?
Well, you have low reception in an elevator, and you know what your cell phone actually does? It ramps up the radiation up to 1,000 times higher to try to reach the tower.
Great!
So in the elevator, you're a little bit frying everyone around you. So instead, it's recommended that you wait until you have 5 out of 5 bars of signal before you use your phone. So that's one way to dramatically reduce your exposure, and that's fairly simple. Also, you don't get frustrated because you get calls dropped off.
So y'all don't use the cell phone in the elevator.
Yes.
1,000 times more.
And don't annoy your neighbors.
Well, they don't even know it, right? I mean, they don't even know it that they're getting bombarded. Super great examples, Nicholas. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, my pleasure.
So next we have a doctor who has invented a chip that may minimize the effects of EMFs. It's amazing stuff. Coming right up. Stay with us.
Would you use something if it was considered experimental or it had never been tested to your effects of your health? And what would you say to me? Well, most of them say, well, I doubt if I'll do that. And I say, but you are. It's called Wi-Fi.
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching the Dr. Nandi Show, and unbelievable show so far for me. Next we have Dr. Michael Halliday, founder of Protex, as possible solution against the effects of EMFs. Dr. Halliday, pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nandi. Really appreciate you having me.
Of course. Tell me about why you got involved in it. We were talking about you've got grandkids, right?
Yes. This April I'll have 11.
Oh, congratulations! Wow.
Yeah,
So tell me about why you're passionate about this subject.
Well, it really started about 20 years ago when I lost both of my parents to cancer, and I started to study water and the effects of water. And when I looked at all the research done by Jacques Bunivist, the biologist out of France, and then Luc Montagnier recently, who won the Nobel Prize for the AIDS discovery,
Yes.
and his research on DNA, and what he was able to do is to visually look at DNA in water, and once he removed the DNA out of the water and then came back, they then found the DNA was rebuilding itself. So where did that information come from? And it really comes down to frequencies. Everything is frequencies. Your frequencies, I'm frequencies. So as we looked at, was there a possible way for us to then take those frequencies and change them? So where our device and our technology is very different from anyone else is the technology is near field communication. Like when people go to the hotel and they take the key and the door opens, that's near field, all right? When you take the near field is you've got active and you've got passive. An active device is what's in your phone, which stimulates Google Pay or Apple Pay. Passive is it must be excited by something. So the materials that are excited in there are excited by the Wi-Fi that we can't see, all right, and by the EMF that's coming out of the phone. But what's also very, very interesting is when I ask my patients this question, would you use something if it was considered experimental or it had never been tested to your effects of your health? And what would you say to me? Well, most of them say, well, I doubt if I'll do that. And I say, but you are. It's called Wi-Fi.
Yes.
Because Wi-Fi fell under the grandfather clause of the 1996 bill they did in 1997. But here's what's very interesting is, would Coca-Cola go to the sugar industry and ask them what are the values or how many grams of sugar should we put
in my Coca-Cola?
All right?
Right.
Well, that's the same thing with the cell phone industry, because the FCC went to the mobile devices and said, what are the safety limits that we should be putting into our site? And they did that, and they accepted that as a standard. So in 1996, when that bill was signed and written, they had taken the word of the telecom industry to put that on their site. And to date, as you heard the other viewers say today, those standards have never been changed. They've never tested it, and that's 22 years ago. You know, one of the questions that I would even go and ask your viewers, you know, when they leave here today, is to go home, take your youngest children, put a cigarette in their mouth, light the cigarette, and you're probably looking at me saying, this guy's absolutely crazy. What's he thinking about?
Right, right.
Well, the International Association of Research on Cancer has classified that as a class 2B carcinogen that potentially can cause cancer. Do you know that your mobile phone goes under the same classification as the International Cancer Research Foundation, and in addition to the World Health Organization that classifies those as a class 2B carcinogen? So my question to you is, do you either give them a cigarette or do you give them a cell phone? They both are classified the same.
That's unbelievable.
And that's why I chose to pursue Protex to protect these young children.
We have to, maybe if you could explain some of these products, because people can go online, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about them before we go to break.
So two functions. Any liquid that you consume, you can put that into, and it'll clear that liquid out of the frequencies.
So this, okay.
The pollutant frequencies.
And what about these? What does this do?
The devices are for any electronic device you have in your house. So whether it's your cell phone, whether it's your router, your computer, wherever you place it on, protects your biofield as you walk within that vicinity of the device, of what it's emitting, all right?
Okay.
And then
The last one.
I love dogs.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I had 4 dogs at one time. They thought I was running a kennel there. But we're so passionate about our animals, and they're the ones that are laying around the computer, the router. We need to protect them as well. And like I say to people, test it on humans and found to be safe for your pets.
Thank you so much, Dr. Halliday. Really poignant example. Would you give your child a cigarette and light it up? Of course you wouldn't. So we're doing the same thing now by not doing anything to protect them from EMFs. Great show so far. We'll end up with Partha's prescriptions. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You've been watching the Dr. Nandi Show. And technology is constantly changing, and as we learned today, we need to be concerned about the safety of electromagnetic fields. Luckily, there are several things each of us can do to keep our families safer. So here are my Partha's prescriptions. First, use the speakerphone or a wired headset whenever possible, and keep your phone away from your person, never in your pocket or bra. Also, don't keep electronics in your bedroom, and don't place your router in your bedroom or where your family studies or even watches TV. We hope you found today's episode of value to you and your family. I know I learned a ton. We'd love to also hear from you. Please search Partha Nandi MD on Facebook, Twitter, and join the discussion. Also, for other topics in healthy living, please be sure to visit me at AskDrNandi.com. Lastly, there's a beautiful word in the Hindi language that literally means the light in me honors the light in you, and that word is namaste. So namaste to each and every one of you. I thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.